limerence is a safe place to hide because you can just stay in that thinking about that ideal relationship that may or may not ever come to be instead of sinking into a real relationship with somebody that may fail. And then there's always the sense that you're trying to better yourself because you're never good enough for them because you're the one that put them on the pedestal to begin with.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens, and as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. My hope is through these conversations, you learn about their craft and them as a person. You'll become like me, fiercely loyal and want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book, or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. Amanda McCracken is a journalist and essayist whose writing explores the raw, real parts of the human experience, from the science of healing to the ache of longing. With a background in health, linguistics, athletics, and a deep curiosity for what drives our motivation, Amanda's voice is at once intimate, incisive, and widely respected. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Guardian, Glamour, Elle, ESPN, AARP, Huffington Post, Outside, Men's Journal, Runner's World, Triathlete, and Women's Running. Whether unpacking the neuroscience of desire or exploring the emotional grit behind endurance sports, Amanda writes with both vulnerability and journalistic rigor. As many of you know, this podcast is a passion project of mine because as a reader, I love being able to meet and talk to the writers I read. I've been overwhelmed with the support from the writers I do know, so thank you. Amanda was the very first writer to reach out via email in December, and I had just started in November with this impressive bio and talk about her debut book and how she'd like to be a guest. She will always have a special place in my heart that connecting books and readers through this platform matters. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I didn't know that little factoid about being the first one to reach out. So I'm excited to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. You just published your first book, memoir, When Longing Becomes Your Lover. Can you give us a brief snapshot of this book?
Sure. It is a book that I really started writing to untangle myself from my own patterns. And I'm not one that really likes to just write strict, like diary memoiristic writing. I like to kind of like dig into the research. And so that's what the book became. And in a nutshell, the way I describe it to folks is that it is exploring like what happens when you find yourself more in love with the feeling of falling in love than actually being in a stable and healthy, albeit it might seem boring, relationship.
It is a terrific book. We talked a little bit earlier that I read it, and it kind of gutted me, but in the best of ways, because you start talking about a subject and things that we don't often talk about. And we live in a world where so much of ourselves is on social media that's carefully curated to look as if we're living our best life all the time. And I think we do have moments where we're living our best life, but that's not all the time. And so taking a moment to kind of unpack, as you said, and kind of understand or untangle, I think helps a lot of those of us who read the book untangle as well. And so you introduced us to this concept of limerence. Will you talk a little bit and explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, thank you for that huge compliment. And I learned about limerence as in the process of actually writing this book. And even after I did my TED Talk, I didn't even know when I went back and listened to the TED Talk, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was describing that I had been experiencing for years. So limerence is the psychology term to describe a state of mind where you are ruminating, sometimes obsessively, not always, about a love interest that you've put on a pedestal. You often really don't know that much about them, which is why it's easy to put them on a pedestal and idealize them and see them without flaws. And there has to be I don't know, there's some kind of math equation where there has to be uncertainty and hope involved in order for the limerence to stay alive. So those are some of the key things. I mean, a lot of people say, well, isn't that just a crush? And I described it as like a crush on steroids, or just sometimes thoughts become intrusive. And it's the kind of crush where you're like constantly checking in with, whether for me, it was often my mom or a best friend who wasn't sick of me talking about that person. And
Right.
just being like, okay, what should I do next? Or will you listen to this text? Does this sound okay? What do you think this text means? Should I email them? Or, and almost like a fear. There's definitely a fear of rejection too.
Right.
So sometimes my biggest limerent crushes were people I was deeply fearful of saying the wrong thing, and that they either wouldn't respond or they would reject me.
If I'm being honest, which you should never use that phrase because then everybody thinks you're always dishonest. However, I think it's a feeling that we can all relate to. I think we've all been in situations, and it doesn't matter if it's a work colleague, a supervisor, a dear friend, somebody that we've just met, that we all will overthink and overanalyze, and it just consumes a ton of time. Instead of the older I get, I realize the more direct we can be because we know ourselves and we know kind of where our boundaries are and what our likes and dislikes are. But I think what you described throughout this book is such a relatable thing. And so I'm glad that you chose to write this book.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I've heard from a lot. I've heard from a lot of people that they have experienced it at least some point in their life, and I think that's pretty true. And there's a smaller group of people, smaller percentage of people who have kind of made this their like MO. That they just go through life with limerent. They're called limerent objects. Probably an awful name, right, to describe it as an object. But once you dig into what limerence is, it's more easily understandable why they described it as a limerent object.
I think it's fascinating that this book is so grounded in research, right, in the neuroscience that you did, and at the same time is delivered in a way that makes it incredibly accessible for people. It's not this textbook. It's not a JAMA article where you're trying to figure out exactly what things mean. So I think that I know there have to be tons of people who've read already and are just like, oh my gosh, where was this book 5 years ago? Where was it 10 years ago? I think it's incredibly helpful. One of the things I liked is you chose to structure your book in chapters, and every chapter starts with an epigraph. So I guess the question is, did the epigraph come first, or did the chapter come and then you found just the perfect epigraph to kind of kick off the chapter?
More often, I wrote the chapter and then found the right epigraph for it. And there are a couple of those epigraphs that I've loved for a long time, those quotes that I've loved, and thought maybe someday I'll use this, like I'm one of those kids that had like a quote book when I was in high school, and I still reference that quote book.
Well, I have a quote book as an adult, so there are just lines in books that you just want to pull out and savor and reread them all over again.
Or movies, yeah.
Yes. Talking a little bit about some of the terms, neuroscience terms that we learned in the course of reading this book, one of which was lover shadow. Can you talk a little bit about introducing us to that?
Sure. Yeah, this is a term I came across actually in a Freudian psychoanalytic book called, what was it called? I love this book, Dreams of Love and Other Fateful Encounters, I think is what it's called, Ethel Person. And it was a term actually coined by H.G. Wells to describe, it's really kind of this complex thing to describe. And that was something I really struggled to describe in the book too. It's like basically this idea you have, maybe even an image, but more so an idea that you have of this person. And you have of this person that like want to be with when you grow up. That's how I understood it. So even as a child, this is this idea that you conceive. It's the way it's described is that you kind of go through life trying to like match this image or this concept or this idea you have of a person to all of these other people that you encounter to see if it's a match. the way I saw it too is that it could be something that, is influenced by movies you see or characters you read in books and so on and so forth. And so I certainly feel like I had this lover shadow that I was trying. It's like almost like a piece of clothing you were trying on maybe on different people to see if it fit.
Right.
So,
I think that's so well said because it's such a, I want to say, semi-abstract concept, but to be able to put it into words, that makes perfect sense.
yeah, it's really hard to describe.
Yeah, but you did a great job of describing things that we sometimes feel but don't have words for. I think that's where books are wonderful, and people who, write the books are even more special because they've taken the time to examine and then put it into language because sometimes I'm feeling, but I can't find the word for it. And you've done that
Mhm.
with this book. And the story's kind of framed around three people you refer to anchormen. You want to talk a little bit about those three individuals?
Sure. Yeah, that was also a term that I came up with later. Originally, that chapter where I described them was called the deserters because I felt very deserted by them. And
Right.
then and that's very accusatory. And I think part of what I hoped when I wrote the book that it came across that I was not, complaining about these people that I felt had dissed me, but it was more of an exploration of like, why did I feel so attached to them? And why was I so crazy sometimes? And so these three individuals were people that either I had dated long term or short term or more just kind of had like a situationship with like over a period of 15 years, at least particularly for the artist. And that either I feel like in different ways, I often would compare other men that I was dating to one of these three men to see how they measured up. Or I would go through my life basically beating myself up for screwing it up, screwing up the relationship. I called them my anchor men because of the research I came across about anchor memories. It was a psychologist, Jefferson Singer, I think is his name, that described these anchor memories that are tied to significant times in your life or goals even. And when I looked back at these three guys, one was somebody I'd started dating just at the end of college. So it was a significant transition in my life. Another one I had dated when I first moved to Boulder. I started the relationship loosely when I first moved to Boulder. And also, he was related to he was the first guy I ever said, okay, I'm willing to have sex with you. And he said no. So that was also a significant moment in my life. And then the other guy, the artist, I started dating him right around the time of my grandfather's death. And my grandfather is very important to me. Although I didn't feel like I went into as much depth as I wish I could have about my grandfather and why he was so important. But so those three guys kind of like literally haunted my dreams, and two of them still do. So the soldier I rarely dream about, but the artist and Mon Ami, I still have dreams about.
I was fascinated. You said it was Singer's work, and he talks about these memories that they're vivid, they're emotionally charged, they're repeatedly recalled, and they're linked to other memories. And then they tend to be focused on lasting goals or unresolved conflicts. And so I think dreaming, haunting, whatever the right word is, there are certainly significant moments in our lives where things happen, and the people that we're with when those things happen become imbued in that happening.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the unresolved piece is a really key word there. And that's why I think I still have dreams. Like I used to be like, oh, I'm still dreaming about the artist because he's the one. No, it was just my subconscious still trying to figure it out. And then there was nothing to ever figure out. So,
And I think that's the hard thing with life that we don't always have, like we see with movies or even some great books, that there's always a sense of resolution, some sense of, I know I'm going to say the word closure, which is so overused, but that sense of resolution that allows us to move forward. But, we still are moving forward, but yet not always with that nice, neat resolution that we need. And then that
right.
influences. Somebody told me this morning that there's a difference between influencing and determining. So
Hmm.
somebody can influence you, but they don't determine who you are. And I thought that was just a really good way to express. And so it kind of resonated when I was thinking back about your book, that these things have influenced you, but not determined you.
Right. And I think that's a key thing to remember because yeah, we're always we may feel stuck, but we are still moving forward, whether we want to or not. So but
Exactly.
yes, they're influencing. It's a lot lighter. It's a lot lighter way of moving through life. I feel like if you feel like these people that we felt like we were in love with influenced us, but don't determine who we are and who we're going to be.
I think it comes across as more of a growth mindset. Carol Dweck.
That's exactly the word I was thinking of.
Yeah, that is kind of what I thought of versus that fixed mindset. So I think hopefully people will take that away from this book as well. And reading in this book, you talk about growing up, being that high achiever, the oldest, not that I can relate, that pushed and incredibly driven, and kind of the whatever you set your mind to, you accomplish. And you don't just do it, you do it at an elite level, which I think is really kind of interesting. And I'm wondering if what your research when you were looking says about people who are driven like that, are they more susceptible, if that's the right word, to limerence?
Well, I think if you look, yeah, I mean, I think some of the research has maybe even looked at like perfectionism. At least that's the connection that I made. That high achievers also tend to, I think, be more perfectionists, and and so limerence is a safe place to hide because you can just stay in that in that thinking about that ideal relationship that may or may not ever come to be instead of sinking into a real relationship with somebody that may fail.
Right, because along with that limerence, the reason it exists is the fear of rejection is so great that you kind of put them on a pedestal and you're not kind of fully invested.
Yeah, and then there's always the sense that you're trying to better yourself because you're never good enough for them because you're the one that put them on the pedestal to begin with.
Right. It's such a complicated, I mean, it's so hard being a human being some days, right? I mean, there's all these competing things that are still happening and they're happening at the same time. I mean, it's certainly not that, you call customer service and, emotions are not dealt with in the order in which they're received, right? But they're all coming at you and you do a great job of being able to articulate what that's like, what that
Oh, thank
feels
you.
like and how it showed up in your life.
Mhm.
And I really want to like your friend who gave you the bracelet, the cuff bracelet.
Well, yeah. Yeah, you would probably like her. She's very, very straightforward. Yeah, she gave me this bracelet that says "Trust Yourself" on it, and
Mhm.
I mean, she probably gave that to me in my late mid-30s. When I talked to her about it, I was like she's like, "I don't remember that." Okay. But she's definitely that kind of person that would be like your friend, the kind of friend most of us have that's like, tells you when you're being batshit crazy.
Yeah.
So,
And I think we all need friends like that to kind of call us out and kind of say, "Hey, wait, take a breath," you know?
mhm.
So I think that's incredibly important. And then it's just a simple reminder, but we get so caught up, I think, just in today's culture that we worry so much about what other people think that we
Mhm.
become like we don't quite know who we are because we're so like whether it's the people pleaser mentality or the wanting to fit in versus belong, which
Mhm.
big fan of Brene Brown talking about fitting in is basically agreeing with everybody because you want to be liked versus, hey, look, I happen to like this particular thing and people being okay with it because that's who you are authentically. But so much of your book, what I came across was it comes down to worth
Mhm.
and knowing that you're worthy. Can you talk a little bit about how you evolved to that point?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think from the outside, I look like a pretty confident person, and I actually feel like a pretty confident person. But I think there's definitely a difference between self-confidence and self-worth.
Hmm.
And for some reason, I mean, I explore this in the book of like, why did I feel like I was unworthy of the artist, for example, my longest lasting limerent object? I just never felt like pretty enough for him or perfect enough for him. And so I feel like there was something that was appealing about chasing these guys that I saw as better than me because it it meant that I basically continued living the same story that I wasn't worthy of the relationship I was seeking. And, part of what I had to learn to do, which is really also hard to describe, is to receive love. I felt really good at giving it, felt very comfortable with giving it, but receiving it felt like repulsive. So guys that were really affectionate, complimentary, and I was like, quickly I would run away. So yeah, so in the book, I try to unpack what that was all about, looking back at, patterns, even back to my birth and my mom having her stroke, and looking at like how that might have played into it. And yeah, you can unpack your background till, the cows come home, but it doesn't help you move forward. So the work that I did with my therapist really helped me change my mindset that I was worthy of love. And so I think the key phrase in the book that I often bring up in podcasts is that mantra that she had me write in my journal, that I am ready for and worthy of a deeply intimate and loving relationship. So I was writing that before I met Dave. And even after I met Dave, I went back to my journal and found that I was still writing that. And he knew it too. He started going to therapy with me actually maybe a month into our dating. So, which I remember one of my friend was like, well, why? Like, what's wrong with the relationship? And I was like, no, that's what's right. Like, this guy is willing to sit with me in this very uncomfortable situation and be there for me.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool.
It's it's very cool. And I think it's an Eastern medicine where you pay the doctor to stay well with your well visits. And if you're sick, then you're not charged because they didn't do their quote unquote job to keep you healthy. So it makes me think a little bit about that. People were like, oh, I don't need to go to therapy and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's a very healthy thing to do. It's no different than anything else physically that we have going on, to be able to have those conversations and to find a guy that great that is willing to get to know you and what's important to you in that space.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And
So
I would say if I had met him, even 2 years before that, maybe even a year before I met him, I would have totally been turned off by how available and transparent he was. But I had made enough mistakes, I think, and done enough therapy to be like, okay, this actually is good and safe and real love.
that makes me happy that you brought your mantra to fruition, that it became a reality. There was a few lines, as I have several pages of notes, that kind of resonated with me, that you talk a little bit in the book about comparing it to anorexics, that they stay stuck so you could belong. And so I think there's sometimes those of us who have particular narratives will stay stuck in them because we're
Mhm.
around other people who have that same narrative or understand that narrative. And so the fact that you took that gigantic leap to essentially rewire your brain to
Mhm.
not just give love but receive love, I think is incredible.
Yeah, it was not easy. And I think that's a really good point you brought back up about like when I talked to my friend who dealt a lot with anorexia, and she talked about how there was almost a whole community around it. And it's a tricky thing to talk about, so I don't wanna overstep, but yeah, that you would almost, like you said, stay stuck to belong in the group. And I think that sometimes even the people that we surround ourselves with that are still bemoaning singlehood and shitty guys and whatever, bad dates, and then it's just like, that's just our story, that's just who we are. That's just, we'll get together and like bitch some more, And so, I think being able to separate yourself from that at some point and realize that you really are worthy of more. I don't want to say that I broke away from other friendships, but sometimes can be a toxic mentality depending on what friends you're hanging out with.
Right. Do you remember the moment at which you decided that it was time to kind of grow forward, even though that was something that you didn't know, like you knew limerence? Was there like a encapsulating moment where you're like, all right, enough, like whether it's the straw that broke the camel's back or
Yeah. You mean like move forward with him, or to start like believing that I was worthy of
start,
more?
start believing that you were worthy of more?
Well, I think I bring this one up in the book that there was that moment when after I'd gone to Detroit in hopes that this
Yes.
doctor that I'd fallen in love with on an airplane would show up if I came to visit. And so that's the background. So basically I bought these 2 tickets to this
Mhm.
concert in Detroit in hopes, and I told this guy that I had met up with a couple times that I would be there and I had a ticket if he wanted to come. And he was like, I'll try to make it. I'll try to make it. And of course he never showed up. I bought like a 24-hour flight. Like I was flying in, flying out. It was like it was like the most batshit crazy thing I've done, but I felt like I had to do it to see if it would work, and I was like on the precipice of turning into a 40-year-old virgin, and it was a week before. And I went back to my therapist after that and, had a very gut-wrenching session with her, and she's like, I'm not surprised you did it. Like, she knew I was thinking about it.
Right.
And she said, I think you just had to hurt bad enough to move forward. And I don't think everybody has to hit rock bottom, but for me, that was probably my rock bottom. I still made a few more mistakes after that, but that was like the most like masochistic thing I've ever done.
The thing that strikes me about you, I think you're just badass. I think you're incredibly smart, incredibly kind, generous, all of those things, and brave. I mean, you've written essays, and this book started as an essay that you published. And of course, there's the whole, once you make it public, there's well, everybody can weigh in with an opinion. And so the fact that you first of all talk about it and show up and write about it and publish it, brave. The fact that you open yourself up to all of that feedback where everybody has an opinion, that's brave. The fact that you did a 24-hour flight, for the doctor, bought tickets, brave. At the same time, what's also brave is being able to step into that forward growth mindset of, I am worthy of love and a relationship. And so it just strikes me that both things are brave, and one hurt and the other one is the unknown. And is that the fact that it's unknown or uncertain? Is that what keeps people from moving in that direction? Do you think?
Moving in the direction of what?
Like knowing that they're worthy of love and done
And
with the not so great guys.
I mean, I think, well, I apply the uncertainty to, well, for me, the uncertainty, I don't know. That's a tricky one. Like, I mean, uncertainty for me about these men that I thought were really mysterious and elusive was the attractive piece. And Dave was anything but uncertain. I mean, of course, he had been married, divorced. There were certain things sometimes when I still say, "Oh, did this happen?" Is this what, when he and I are fighting, and I'll be like, "Oh, is this what, this straw that broke the camel's back," sort of thing. So there
Yeah.
is the uncertainty of like, "Oh, what will happen to us?" But I think I mean, I really think the piece about people not going and moving in the direction of feeling worthy of love is that they just haven't practiced it for so long. And for so long, I had practiced that I wasn't, or I had pursued relationships where I didn't feel worthy of it. So I feel like it's like literally training your brain. For me, that's how it feels like.
It's what's comfortable. I mean, I think human nature is to move towards what is pleasurable and away from what is not pleasurable. And that uncertainty is not always pleasant.
Yeah. And I think as an artist, too, I feel like a lot of writers, are drawn to more of the uncertainty and the limerence and the mystery because it's a more of a muse. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking, well, what am I going to write about if I'm not sad and heartbroken or chasing after someone anymore? Like I'll be sapped of any of my creativity. So there was that underlying fear too. I think there is a fear because who would I be if I wasn't Amanda McCracken, single, sad, and pining after someone?
But there's also the Amanda McCracken who meets a great guy, has a very great relationship, has a daughter. It's like the antithesis, but maybe you had to go through all of that to end up where you are now and appreciate it that much more
Hmm.
because of what happened prior to.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I feel like when I'm like, where is this book going, or who is anybody going to read this book, or, what do people think of it? I just try to remember, that I wouldn't be where I'm at if I hadn't started writing it. Like, I feel like I wrote myself into the happy ending that I had been seeking. So that is in and of itself worth it.
Absolutely. And I know we were talking a little bit before about who's going to read this book. Are people going to look at it, the title, and the cover is gorgeous. Not that we ever judge books by the cover, but the cover is gorgeous. When Longing Becomes Your Lover is just an intriguing title. And you expressed, like, are people going to put it away like they're not ready for this? I would think even if you aren't somebody who has experienced limerence, I think there's so many great takeaway lessons here. I mean, there are things that resonate with us just being a human being about what do we do? How do we, if we're high achievers and things are not achieving as high as we like to, how do we reconcile that? I think that's always kind of a thing. You're an incredible runner, still run today.
Hmm.
But if that were taken away, how would you process who are you without running? Because that's so much a part of who you are. And so
Yeah,
limerence,
originally I had a chapter titled Identity because I feel like that is definitely a thread throughout this whole thing.
which is probably why it resonated as much as it did with me. And I know with other readers as well. And just like beautifully phrased sentences that you talk about. And I think this is one of my favorite sentences where you talk about love being depicted as this winged Cupid and death being depicted as the grim reaper. And then trying to figure out what would waiting be depicted as. And I
Hmm.
just think that just I thought about it like the rest of the book as I'm reading. I wonder what it would look like.
And I wrote that line. I very much remember that line because I wrote that line like 10 years ago. And
Wow.
something that I was writing, there's so many pieces of this book that I had written, which I think is good because, well, it's good to have the perspective that I do now, but also I had so many pieces that I'd been working on as I was trying to grapple with virginity and unrequited love, and attachment and things like that.
Yeah, there's another great line. I felt a sense of panic, like knowing something you loved was beginning to unravel and you wouldn't be able to repair it because someone had run away with the string.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things
Soldier.
that just kind of hits.
Hmm.
And then there's another example that you talk about in terms of baggage. We all have lived experiences. We've lived lives before we've met other people. And so people talk, oh, well, they have baggage. My thing is it something that fits in the overhead compartment or underneath the seat in front of you versus has to be checked? However,
Right.
you talked about it as baggage versus resilience.
Mm.
And I just thought, what a great, what a great way to look at something. And that those neural pathways that you rebuilt, with the mantra that you embraced and then living that out. I think you said it earlier, it's not easy. I think a lot of things, if they were easy, more people would do them. But if you're willing to do the hard work, the tough work, then you end up like Amanda McCracken, with,
Well,
you
thanks.
know,
I mean, I think about sometimes like Dave is very much an accommodator. And so I remember, we still go to therapy because I think it's healthy. And we've
agreed.
talked about with the therapist, we have these characteristics that make us who we are, but they allow us to be a certain way that like a therapist would be like, well, yes, that might drive you crazy, but he wouldn't be doing this for you if he wasn't also that kind of person. So I feel like it's sometimes like with the ADD, like it can be a real creative source, and it can just drive me crazy and distract me from what I need to be getting done sometimes. So the pros and the cons. I think talked about. I would feel like I talked about the baggage in term like as a in the description with the going to the animal shelter and how we look at the animals, whether or not they've got all this past history, not interested in them. I want a young puppy that I can mold. Forget that we have all of our own baggage ourselves.
Right. I would also say that could probably apply to any of the people that we meet or online dating sites, right? That we're very
Mhm.
quick to dismiss things without knowing that person's story and that person's approach to it. It's such a fantastic book. I hope more people read it, and learn
Thank
from it and take away from it that it is possible to change your narrative in a way that is healthy and allows you to have the things that you deserve to have.
Yeah, it definitely takes work, but it's definitely possible.
It's no different than you running. I mean, you didn't just pick up and start running one day, the hills and the mountains and all of that. I mean, you worked up to that. That's work, training, right? So can training also apply to our brain and our heart at the same time? And know that eventually you will be okay if you do the work,
Yeah,
you
and the
know?
work for me was really somatic. Some of the work that I did really was feeling in, and that's something I talk about in the book,
Mhm.
and I just have an essay coming out in Runner's World about, like, how I got really good at dissociating during running, like, tuning out from my body, and then I started applying that in physical intimacy, and that was just not a good direction to go. So, in the somatic therapy and counseling, we really worked on feeling into how things actually felt in my body, and that was really, 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 really difficult and uncomfortable work, but important.
Important, right, to do because obviously, you've accomplished great things and will continue to do and to live this great life that you've, I wanna say, longed for. I'm thinking when longing becomes your lover, should I use that word in this? But
Yeah, I mean, I still let longing I still let longing get the best of me sometimes, so I feel like I'll always be a longer, I just have to kinda, like, keep it in perspective so it doesn't, like, eat me alive, but feeds the creative side of me, but doesn't keep me from seeing what I have right here in front of me.
I think that's a great piece that you just said, that just because you've gone through that tough work doesn't mean that it's gone and gone forever, but you are knowing how to live with it and how to interrupt it sooner so that it doesn't have as big of an impact. And I think that's the thing. People, I think, today want this quick fix that either they want something to be easy, or once you do the tough work, then boom, it's gone and you don't ever have to think about it again. But it's always going to be kind of part of who you are. It's just not as big a part of who you are.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that you didn't have a lot of time to talk about your grandfather and how important he was to you in this book. Do you want to spend a couple of minutes talking about him now?
Oh, sure. As long as I don't cry. Yeah, I have a picture right here. Of course, the, listeners can't see, but
Yeah.
that was
How
him with
sweet.
me when I was little. But he was just kinda like that larger than life person that was really he was a dentist, but he was also, really, I think he would have wished to have been an artist or a writer, but followed in his brothers and father's footsteps, and I just he was probably a bit of a perfectionist himself. I see a lot of myself in him, and we went fishing a lot together. That's what I remember, a lot of, and he kept my, um I have, like I'm looking at a folder right now that says something about, like, Amanda's writing, like, he kept my writing, made me feel like it was worth something, and there are certain people, I think, in our lives that do that for us, and like, you after he's gone, find that folder of my writing, and he's like, "Oh, he thought that was worth something," and that really matters to me, I think, so it's hard to describe. I haven't cried about him for a long time, but
I
yeah,
certainly didn't mean to make you cry, but I wanted
that's
an
okay.
opportunity for you to capture just how special he was.
Yeah, I don't think I can quite capture, but maybe my tears kinda capture that, so
Yes. Yeah.
I think I might have mentioned this in the book that the most vivid memory I have of him was at a college cross country race, and he was down on one knee, like, screaming for me when it probably took him 10 minutes to get up from that knee. So, he's
Those are
very
the people
passionate. Yeah.
those are the people we need in our lives.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you had him, and I'm glad you're that for others as well.
Well,
So,
thank you.
mhm,
A good balance, right? We don't want
ab
everybody to be
No,
a
heck no.
perfectionist in your life. Otherwise, yeah.
Look at what happened. Yeah, I would talk to you the rest of the day, but this is Stories and the final 5 questions. Mantras are helpful to interrupt thoughts. Do you have a new mantra now, or do you still use the same one?
Yeah, the one I've been writing in people's books actually is nurture the longing that nurtures you. So, did I write that in your book?
Yes. I'm
Okay,
looking
good.
at it right now. Nurture the longing that nurtures you.
Yeah, because I think that's something you can move forward with, whether, it doesn't only apply to romantic longing, right?
I told myself when I started this podcast, I'd give myself a year to see what happens. And somebody said to me, does it bring you joy?
Mhm.
It does, a ton of it. So I will continue to do it for that reason, and the fact that I get to talk to amazing people who are changing the world little bits, pages at a time. Next question. What's the most unusual thing you've experienced on book tour since you published?
I wish I could say I've had a ton of experiences. I mean, probably, well, the experience of fearing that the anchorman's mom is going to show up, or that the artist is actually going to show up in Chicago. So I've actually had the fears of those sorts of things happening, and they didn't come to fruition. Probably maybe one of the most interesting was on actually the day that it was launched. I had a event here in Boulder at a cafe, and this guy that I had dated, and he was a nice guy. He was one of those that I had eventually was like, no, you're way too nice and too transparent and into me. So see you later.
Gone.
He showed up, and his ex-wife also showed up, and they didn't know that they were both showing up. And he had married her after we had dated,
Okay.
and more recently they got divorced, and so they didn't know they were both showing up to my event. And I don't know her that very well, but it was like that was just kind of cool.
That's
So
very
that they
cool.
both felt like either A, wanting to support me, or felt like the work that was relevant to them.
Is relevant to anybody who reads this book. We
And that
will
my
all.
psychic at that same event, my psychic and my therapist showed up to that book talk.
How cool. I'm intrigued by the psychic. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Funny, my daughter just this morning before she left said that my superpower secret is that what did she say? My superhero secret is that my superhero secret power is that I'm a superhero. I think that's what she said.
How sweet.
So if I had that power, I would just let go of things that, I mean, this is more of a selfish thing, right? It's not, I guess it's not like that I would like save all of humanity from poverty, but I guess personally I would like be able to let go of anything that really bothered me.
Oh,
Sounds so lame. I don't know. I'll
no, it
have to come
doesn't, because I wish I had that superpower. You could bestow that upon me.
But then I would have never written this book. I would have just been like, whatever. So I guess that can serve you in different ways. So probably I'd just pick something generic, like be able to fly. Be really
That'd be
cool to be
pretty
able to
great.
fly.
I just want to be able to travel like, I dream of Deanie. Just kind of put your hands together and wink, and there you
Yeah,
go.
that would be
Wouldn't that
awesome.
be awesome? What movie can you recite almost every line to?
When Harry Met Sally or Top Gun.
Good choices. Feel the need for speed.
Mm-hmm.
What song would always be on your road trip playlist?
That's a good one. Well, the one my husband, daughter, and I took a road trip in this van, and not that we own it, we borrowed it and I wrote a story about it, but in Colorado. And the one song that kind of became our theme road trip song was George Ezra's Green, Green Grass, Blue, Blue Sky. You better throw a party on the day that I die.
Mm-hmm.
So probably that one. But personally, I would definitely have to have Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys.
There you go. It's awesome. A huge thank you to those of you listening, and an even bigger thank you to Amanda McCracken for writing such a powerful book, When Longing Becomes Your Lover. Your courage and vulnerability makes you a superhero in my book. If you find yourself intrigued and want to learn more, because we could not capture all of the insights and lessons in this conversation, go out and buy Amanda's book, When Longing Becomes Your Lover, hopefully at an indie bookstore. At the end of the day, I believe stories can not only connect us, but they can also heal us. To find out who else is going to be a guest, go to storytocount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.
Thank you for having me.